I'm Ryan Brown, and this is the Unvarnished podcast, and I'm in Florence, Italy, with Tom Richards, who I met for the first time a couple weeks ago. I popped into the Florence Academy, and this is cool for me because of my tie to the Florence Academy, and now there's kind of a changing over. So I'm getting reacquainted with how things are going. The new space is unbelievable. But I don't know a whole lot about you. So this will all be new to me. And I'm excited to hear, your story as well as really your vision for the school and kind of how it came about that you ended up in this position, and so we can jump right in and start. I mean, first of all, we're in your really beautiful home.
It's not mine. I'm a guest here to a large degree. But anyways, yeah, we're up on the hill just above the center of Florence.
Yeah,
and I guess for those people who are listening who know the city a little bit, we're just round the corner from San Miniato, which is the sort of the white marble church up on the hill, or Piazzale Michelangelo, where everyone goes to look at the sunset. So we're just kind of just round the corner from those sort of famous landmarks.
Yeah, and did Leonardo live on this street? And was it also Galileo?
So yeah, Galileo. If you walk both back into town and then up the hill a little bit. So up the hill is a little hamlet or a settlement called Arcetri. So Arcetri, and Galileo had some of his telescopes up there, and there's a big observatory there today. Wow. And then just back down the hill, there are a couple of different plaques on Costa San Giorgio, which is where it's possible that he lived and spent quite a lot of time. So there's two different houses vying to be Galileo's house.
Wow.
And there's the gate that Michelangelo apparently designed or worked on part of the wall. So yeah, we're just outside the old city wall, but we're very much kind of amongst the Renaissance history of the city up here.
Wow. And it's beautiful space. So I can only imagine how inspired you must be just constantly to be surrounded by the architecture that's in here, and I mean, I only got a glimpse walking through to where we're recording this, but it seems like such a beautiful space to wake up to. And
I think also the whole city. I mean, I lived in the center for a long time. I think that's one of the many things that keeps me in Florence is that when you live in this city, compared to say other places I've lived, like London or visit occasionally, like New York, art isn't like, let's say, a luxury lifestyle product here. It's something that is part of the everyday lived experience for everyone in the city. And I think that's a really important thing, that you can sit in a piazza on a stone step having a beer with your friends, and you have a Brunelleschi church behind you, or you have a statue in front of you that might easily have, if you're an art student, inspired the long pose that you're working in that afternoon. And so it becomes something that kind of not just a classroom experience or a museum thing, but it's just something that percolates through you in everyday life. And I really, that's a huge part of why I love living in this city.
Yeah. So how did you come here? I mean, you could tell us as much or as little as you want, but I'd love to hear, where you're from, sort of your art story, how you got into it, how you found your way to Florence, how studied. Whatever you want to tell us, okay, sure. I'm interested in.
So I'm now, I guess, like an early middle-aged man. I'm 42 years old, but I've been coming to Florence since I was pretty young. The high school I went to in the UK, the head of art used to bring students and a few sort of art teachers, but also professional artists to Florence to paint every summer. Yeah. And so I first came here to paint when I was about 14 years old. And I guess both my parents are professionals, so they're not artists, but there were paintings on the wall at home, and I'd go to the National Gallery with my mum, and sometimes my dad too. They both love music, so it wasn't like art was stuck onto life. It was very much part of it, but neither of them were artists. And,
interesting.
It was this trip. I was 15 years old in Florence painting with a group of other people kind of my age or a fraction older, and then these older serious professionals who are making their lives mostly in the UK. And you'd go out and work every morning at like 6 o'clock. You'd come back and you'd sit down, have a glass of wine, and just talk about painting. And I
Wow.
just thought, I want to do this. I want to do this for the rest of my life. I feel so alive. I feel challenged. I feel inspired. And so pretty much at sort of 16, I was like, I want to be a painter and I want to live in Florence.
Wow.
Um,
That's cool. I came to it so much later. So I have had some students that came to me really young, and I've always been jealous of people that find it so early.
but also the search can be so invigorating. I never had, you talk to people who like yourself, and there's that moment of eureka, like your eureka moment when you're maybe an adult and you're able to deal with it in a different way. So there's pros and cons, I guess, to everything. But I then came to Florence. I finished high school and came to Florence at 18 and spent a year with Cecil,
Mm-hmm.
and spent a year basically drawing with a little bit of painting with him. And then I went to a university in Scotland called St Andrews and did a history of art degree, but I was coming back to Florence all the time. Graduated in 2005, and I knew then that I really wanted to be a portrait painter, so I was doing, most of my modules were in sort of 17th century portraits, 19th century portraits. And I had a little studio in the house I lived in at university, and I was painting the whole time. And then came back to Florence, did a few more years with Charles, had a few years where I split between London and Italy.
And what years were those when you went back to?
So 2005 to 8, I was studying pretty full time under Charles, and doing a bit of teaching then as well as a kind of student teacher. And then, up in between, for the next couple of years, I split the year 50-50 between London and Florence, and eventually just realized I was so much happier living in this city. And so I was working pretty full time with Charles for a number of years.
Does that have something to do with the pace of life, the access? I mean, you have access to great museums in London, but I have never. I hate to admit this, but I've never been into London. I've flown through, but I've never spent time there. But is it a little bit more kind of a mix between old architecture and a lot of modern, faster paced life?
It's a brutal market city. A little bit like New York. And some people, particularly some artists, are really able to do the work they want and live in the city. And I found myself worrying about things that I didn't really like worrying about.
Yeah.
And so I've got friends who've managed to do it, and you look at, and it's so impressive to have that. Like it's an inner strength as well. It's not just like the sort of trappings of success or anything. It's just I didn't like what I was worrying about. They were trivial, materialistic things, and I just realized I was happier in Florence.
Yeah. Wow.
And so kind of, eventually, Charles and I had a bit of a falling out and went separate ways. I was really very intimately involved with that school, and had and he was my first teacher in that sense, and I owe a huge amount to him. Yeah. And I'd learned a huge amount from that environment. And then quite soon afterwards, a guy called Jamie Corrith as a portrait.
Oh, I love Jamie.
He's a great guy, and he asked me, he knew he was doing the lectures at the time, and which is something I took over. And when you're in that job, anyone who wants to come and speak, you just jump on the chance. It means you get a week off.
Oh, yeah.
And he said, come and give a couple of talks.
He was doing lectures at the Florence Academy. Okay.
In that moment. And, he was a good friend. And I'd sort of see him on Fridays, and he was like, I've got to come up with another lecture, another thing. I was like, I'm happy to come and help out a little bit. Yeah. And having done that once or twice, Daniel just said, come and sit down and come and let's have lunch. And having worked for Charles, I was very tempted to start something myself. And it was through conversations with Daniel where I realized actually that all the things I really wanted to do and the values I really had in terms of art education, that was what he was doing, and that's where his own goals and ambitions were. It really felt we were unbelievably aligned. Yeah. In that way. And he said, why don't you come and work here? And so I already knew Ramiro and Daniela a little bit as well. And I mean, Ramiro, Daniela, and Daniel were really my main kind of areas of contact. And then got to know other people like Tanvi, because I shared a studio with her when I first started working there. And so I was working sort of pretty much straight away with Ramiro in the third year painters. Yeah. Sort of mostly focused on portraiture, given the experience I'd had with Charles. Sure. And the figure as well. And no, I feel in that sense incredibly lucky to have had a formation. I mean, Daniel's taught me a huge amount too, not just as a painter, but also, as an educator and so on. and I feel very lucky to have been taught very closely by both of them.
Yeah.
And I mean, ultimately, for my own personality, the model Daniel has fits more closely with the way I see education. But yeah, it would be dishonest not to acknowledge everything that came before that.
Sure,
as
sure.
well.
So you officially took over how long ago? Maybe
It was the January of 23.
Okay, so
Quite recently, like
recently,
a year and a half ago.
Yeah.
But it had been we'd had an almost 4-year transition from when Daniel
Mm-hmm.
announced it, and so it was a chance for everyone in the community to understand it. And there are so many people who'd been there, longer than I have, who could have done and would do an amazing job. So
Yeah.
we know lots. We all know the the names.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so it's not really about. I think it was a moment where. That maybe there's an age question, or there's all sorts of questions about. I'd had this, long conversation with Daniel about education. It fitted into my life at the time, maybe better than it fitted into other people who
Mm-hmm.
could have done who would have done a fantastic job. Ramiro would be a fantastic director of the Florence Academy of Art as well. Daniela, I'm sure, had a charisma that made her more than capable of leading people too. So it's not as if it was I'm sure it wasn't an easy choice for Daniel, and that all of those people were have been nothing but supportive.
Yeah. Yeah, great. And so now that you are the top dog, how has that been a transition of like time, focus?
Mm-hmm.
Because I ran a school, and it wasn't anywhere near the size of the Florence Academy. And I know you've got administrators, and you've got quite a bit of help, and several teachers, and the workload is delegated pretty well. But I imagine it's still quite a workload. So how has that affected your ability to paint, your time painting, your personal time in the studio? I'm also interested, kind of a similar question, but how, with being in the academy and surrounded by that academic conversation so much,
Mm-hmm.
how you feel that kind of affects how you look at art, the art that you make, whatever.
No, those are. I mean, it's. We've known each other for a few days now, I guess. But it's, they're very perceptive questions because they come from someone who's basically found, and worked through the same, or is constantly working through the same questions themselves. I think that what you stressed at the beginning, like I get a lot of help.
Yeah.
I mean, I really do. And so Susan Tintori, who I think lots of people who've been through the school, or anyone who knows the Florence Academy world, I mean, my thing is if I'm reducing something to the most absurdly reductive level, I always say the school would never have existed without Daniel, but it would never be in the shape it is today without Susan Tintori.
Yeah, that's what I've always felt. Yeah, for sure. That was a great team.
Unbelievable. And Susan was replaced by an Italian called Antonio Vanni. And he's actually more of an artist than any of the artists in the community. He's a deeply cultured person. He worked at the Uffizi for many years, ran jazz programs for NYU. He's genuinely has he's a very attentive administrator, but he has a deeply bohemian soul.
Yeah.
And so there's and being Italian, it allows him and gives him an insight into certain bureaucratic things here that even a long time resident could never have.
Yeah.
It's such a specific. It's such a specific environment in that way.
Yeah.
So there's and he leads the team in the office, people like Susie Fiddy, who've been there for a number of years. And so we inherited a kind of already a kind of like a purring Rolls Royce in that way, and then people like Ramiro, who are really experienced teachers, Simona Dolci, like really committed educators and wonderful artists in their own right. So I get a lot of help. I find it more in the winter. It's actually easier in a sense. There's the working day, given daylight, is quite limited, and so you don't feel when it gets to 4:00 you can put your brushes down and you think, okay, I've got a couple of hours of academy time now. In the summer when it's sunny and you just want to be painting and that beautiful evening light in a north-facing studio, and so I try to balance it and organize it. You just have to be very, very structured.
Yeah.
So you become quite unartistic. I mean, my girlfriend lives in Rome and she's a lawyer, and she actually has a freer life than I do.
Yeah.
Which is kind of surreal in a way. I mean, you'd assume that the artist would have a freer time, but I found that in order to get the studio time, I need to be able to look at myself and my colleagues in the face. I have to really protect it, but that just
Sure.
means being very organized so that I can do the job I'm also being paid to
Yeah.
do.
Yeah.
So it just means that weeks are quite blocked out, quite a long way in advance.
Yeah.
And I'm most of my painting time is I'm a portrait painter, and people are sitters are quite busy, so their lives are organized quite a long way in advance. So it just means it's almost like you end up sort of realizing that your diary looks like kind of like a stockbroker or something like that. And everything's divided up into half an hour blocks, and the more of those half an hour blocks you can have as painting time. But and the school are very understanding. My job description is also to be a painter as well as being a teacher and the academic director.
Yeah.
And they, Antonio and his team and my colleagues, they understand they understand that.
Yeah.
I tend to have like half the day is fairly sacred painting time.
Yeah.
And the other half the day is like, you can call me.
Yeah. Yeah, I had a hard time with that when I ran a school. I felt like a deep responsibility for the students. They're paying tuition, and I wanted to give them everything they wanted, and I was maybe a little too accessible. There's part of it that I liked about that, just the interaction and the freedom and the, because I felt like once somebody signed up, that we're just friends, and we're just in the same. We're all trying to do this, and but it was, I think I learned something about maybe how to be a little bit more structured about this is teaching time, this is painting time, and I've learned how to grow up and a little bit and be an adult with my scheduling. So as you're with the academy, I imagine so much of the conversation through teaching. And I was talking to Tanvi about this, and a little bit with a few other artists that have taught in the past. It's easy to be swept up in the academic conversation, just this concept of correctness that is essential for students to focus on. And then there's a lot of restrictions that come through kind of this sort of subculture. It's not even really spoken of, but there's a subculture of the academy that discussing sales or self-promotion is dirty, or there's if you use photos, or if you whatever, there's all these little parameters that, again, I don't think are necessarily, when you walk through the door, are told to you as rules you must abide by, but they're in the ether of the academies. And so I think the social weight of your peers kind of plays into what you do in the studio, and if I use a photo, what are they going to think? Or if I spend too much time on Instagram and I'm too self-promoty, or that then people think less. I know, because I felt it, and even when I came home for years, it took a long time to shed that constant concern about what other people thought, and so as the head. How does that still affect you? Have you kind of grown past that? How do you deal with that when you're addressing students? Or
those are all really important questions. I don't think there's one answer. I think it's one of the things I'm really grateful from the art history degree I got is you realize how many different ways there are to be an artist. Mm-hmm. So you can be Fra Angelico, and you can be a monk living in a monastery, and you have to wake up at this time, then you paint, then you go to, and you still make some of the most beautiful paintings the world's ever seen, but you're a monk. Right. And you're living essentially a cloistered life, and that's a totally valid, and the paintings are the proof of that. Yeah. You can be Van Dyck, and you can be basically sucking up to a king in a royal court and produce the most beautiful portraits ever, and that's a totally valid way of being an artist. Yeah. And then you can be a post-romantic rebel in the garret, and putting a middle finger to all sorts of things, and that is also a totally legitimate way of being an artist. Yeah. And I think I'm grateful to my studies for giving me that. It doesn't you have to learn that stuff, and it in the end you have to say, what kind of work do I want to make, and how do I get the world to help me to make it?
Yeah.
And that's not, being a good student is show up on time and try really hard.
Yeah.
Being a good artist is a slightly different set of questions. I mean, if you don't make the work, then you got problems.
Right. Right.
But it's not quite the same. It's in the end, it's a quality judgment. It's not you have to do 4 cast paintings a year. It's a subtly different thing. If you don't go through that formative stage, I think you'll find it hard to have the habits and the resilience. The bark drawings don't teach you. Almost the most useful thing the bark drawings teach you is the resilience. That there are times when you've just got to finish the thing.
Yeah, yeah.
And that's fantastic. There are other times where you learn more from, let's say, setting up a still life than you do painting it, because that's actually a profoundly creative act.
Sure.
And so there are these different moments. And I say to particularly the junior faculty quite a lot. It's like, you're not painting for the student in their second year. Right now they're so excited that they can make it look like something.
Yeah.
But like for the rest of the world, that's not so interesting.
Yeah.
You have to tell us something slightly. There's a different impulse behind making it, I hope.
Sure.
And tell us.
Yeah. That's a conversation I have all the time, because it's the academic. We have the benefit now of like 30 years of retrospect on what the academies have been, how they've evolved or not evolved, what the long-term effects on graduates is, and I have some ideas on that are I feel like are somewhat challenging, and so I'm gonna ask you some questions, because I'd love to get your feedback as now the new head of the academy. But one of the things that used to be novel back in 2002 to 2007, 8. The academies were kind of new, and so there were more people coming out that had like this high level of skill that the market wasn't necessarily used to. And so it was novel, it was exciting, it was, there was galleries picking them up, and there was new collectors coming in and buying them. And 2008 hit, the market changed. At the same time, social media starts to gain momentum, and there's a lot of those factors that kind of came about at the same time that really have shifted the market altogether to where now it seems there's less galleries. It seems that representational galleries tend to do less for the artists, because they kind of have these expectations that you're going to do a lot of work in social media on your own. And there's less publishing opportunities for, like, we used to have magazine articles written and like full page ads, and that doesn't seem to exist as much anymore. And so it feels like to some degree the opportunities are shrinking, and the number of artists who can do skilled work is growing, and yet the level of interesting things that a lot of graduates are doing hasn't really changed. It seems like there's because the academy focuses on the skill development solely with portrait painting, academic nudes, cast, and then shadow box still lives. The graduates typically end up, that's their art, right? That's the only thing that's discussed throughout the process of study. And so when they leave, they just seem to continue to do those things, and practice them, get better at them. They get a little bit more sophisticated with how they handle those things. But there's so much of it now, and we've seen it for decades, that it's lost its novelty. And so I have thought about how the academies can evolve, and one of the things that I always encourage my students to do was to be working on their own paintings outside of class, because there's no natural bridge between learning the skills and learning how to make artistic decisions, how to make a great study and how to make a great work of art. There's two very different mindsets that you have to have when you're doing either or. And just because you know how to draw and paint well doesn't mean you know how to compose a painting. Doesn't mean you know how to make decisions based on what will benefit the concept that you have. And so I feel like what I've wanted to do is help people, encourage people to go through the necessary clumsiness of learning how to find your own ideas, learning how to try and solve those ideas in your own way, to find your own voice, to figure out, how do I think a rock needs to be defined, or how do I want to paint the brick on the wall, or how do I think like a hand works best visually. These are all things that at one point or another you're going to have to figure out on your own. And my feeling, and I'd love, there's a big build up to ask you this question, I'm sorry, but my feeling has been that the avoidance of that conversation in the academies, although I understand why it's avoided, creates an environment that puts the students in a position where they put it off. And so then they graduate and they're total novices in picture making still. They're complete beginners at picture making, but they have a false sense of security in their skills, and no idea how to apply them to art. No idea even what art is in a way. And so I've always just felt like that there's a dual responsibility. One is the institutional responsibility to ingest that into the conversation of the school, to remind them, why are you even here in the first place? There's art comes after this, right? You need to be thinking about that. And then there's, of course, personal responsibility of the individual student, where they have to have that personal motivation. Absolutely. And be willing to go home and do it. So how have you, is that something that you guys have discussed? Is it something that you've recognized? Is it a fair criticism?
Yeah, there's a number of, it's a very fair assessment of, let's say, some of the major challenges that students face when they finish their 3 years and then face a very different set of criteria from the outside world. And so, I mean, there's a number of ways I think we're addressing it. Some are very, very structural, and others are more, let's say, implicit. The first one is that for the first 3 trimesters, for those who don't know, it's a 9-trimester, 3-year, 3-trimester program. The first 3 trimesters, we don't ask for this, but by the 4th or 5th trimester, we expect to see work from, even just if it's a sketchbook with various ideas, and we make it very clear that we expect this to be something that starts to run alongside your academic studies, is the beginnings of a sense of what this might lead to. Yeah. Both in terms of, let's say, compositions and ideas, but also really looking at paintings as well. I think it comes, you can't expect to be a writer if you've never read a book. Absolutely. Most composers have the canon just floating around in their, or conductors in their head. And so with part of that, we started to, by the 3rd year, there is a museum. There's a sort of formal museum visit every trimester. We're taking them to Venice at the start of next year for 3 or 4 days to go and look at paintings. Nice. And then the other part of it is actually, the old Beaux-Arts training in Paris was 7 years. Yeah. So right. The first part, and then maybe 12 if you were lucky enough to get the Prix de Rome. And so what we're instituting, our 3-year program is already pretty tight and it's really intense. But we've got permission now to run an MFA program, and that would be for about 6 to 10 students a year. That's right. I think it might have been you I talked to about that, or maybe Richard Greathouse. Richard's running the MA, which is different. Okay. So the MA is basically a program for art teachers to get drawing back into school education. This is different. This is a 2-year program, fully in Florence, and it will give 6 to 10 artists. You get your own private studio space. You submit an idea. And we bring in specialist teachers from the academy, but also outside people from the curatorial world. And you're going through a process of making studies, executing either a painting or a series of pictures or sculptures. Yeah. And then finally having to defend that thesis and exhibit it and understand how to do it. And that's exactly for that reason. So you need the core skills. You have to apply those and you have to understand those. Yeah. But this is for, I think what's also interesting is that which is to deflect what you said, or to take it and also see it in a different way. Lots of the people coming to study with us now are in the past, everyone wanted to be an easel painter. We're now finding more and more people who are interested in going into, let's say, 3D animation or into the film world.
Oh, interesting.
And so for some people, the MFA would not be so interesting for them.
Sure.
They really want technical control, and they're going to go and work in that way. Almost like someone would go off and be an assistant to Rubens or something.
Yeah.
Previously, he wanted people with a high level of technical skill,
Yeah.
who could help him execute his ideas. And
Yeah.
there's an increasing number of students are taking our training and going into that.
Interesting.
route.
Well, I took a couple of animation courses when I was at university, and what they were desperate for was people that could draw the figure
Yeah.
well. And that was like, they said, we can teach you all the computer skills really
Yeah.
quickly. We cannot take the time to teach you to draw. And I always thought that was really interesting, because, you know, you look back at a lot of the animators, old Disney illustrators, Frank and Ollie, and a lot of the others, and they were just impeccable draftsmen.
Yeah.
So that makes a lot of sense. I've had conversations with artist friends before about, you know, how it's very likely that a lot of the best talent is in Hollywood or in game design, or there's like so many outlets artistically now that like maybe a lot of people who would be, you know, unbelievable painters are just, you know, doing different things.
Yeah. I mean, I think the other thing that gives me optimism is I think it's partly a numbers game, in the extent that I don't think there's ever been a moment in history where there've been more people painting figuratively around the world.
That's probably true, yeah.
And I eventually, you know, let's say if you go back to the 19th century, they were all kind of, you know, 40-year-old guys with beards and top hats, you know, as we would be if we were in Paris in 1880. And the exciting thing today is, you know, you've met Tanvi and various others. We have people from all over the world.
Yeah.
You know, we've got 38 different countries in the Florence Academy right now.
Yeah, that's incredible.
And, you know, almost 400 people applied to come and study with us last year. We can only take 25.
Yeah.
And I find those numbers, you know, and every time there's a big show in New York or in London, people are queuing up round the block to get in.
Yeah.
And so I don't share that kind of doomsday sense that some people out there do. You hear certain, you know, in sort of certain parts of, you know, newspapers, in the media, people saying, "Oh, Western culture is dead," or whatever.
Yeah.
I think there's never been more interest in it.
Yeah.
It's not everyone's using it to the same ends.
Yeah.
But you know, when you see, you know, every time I walk into the school and there's like 120 young people from 38 different countries who are just desperate to learn this stuff.
Yeah.
And you go to London, you can't get a ticket for the Leonardo da Vinci show.
Yeah.
I think reports of the death of Western civilization are a little premature.
I think so. I think one of the things that is a bit frustrating to me in America, because I think, and this is something I've learned by traveling around in Europe quite a bit, is Europeans definitely appreciate their heritage. I think there's a great appreciation for history and the fact that, you know, this happened here and this is my heritage, my culture. The access to museums, you know, I go to museums, they're always packed, and they're always, you know, all different ages. I think there's an obvious continued interest in painting and sculpture, but representational painting is still a novelty in America because it only had a foothold for a little while, right? We had the first American movement in painting was the Hudson River School. And then you had a lot of Americans that went to Paris to study and brought that back. And then, of course, you had the illustrators who lasted a little bit longer in terms of representation and narrative, you know, deep into the modernist movement, you know, that started in the 20s, 30s. But, you know, I feel like the larger tradition in America that had maybe a little bit longer time to really take hold was the modernist tradition. And so representational painting tends to be more of a novelty, which means there's maybe more of an active buying audience in America than there might be in spots in Europe. But also I have the sense that classical painting hasn't really turned a corner in really building a loud or being loud enough to build a strong following where to say compete with the largest representational art market in America, which is Western. And I think that a lot of us, we have conversations all the time, are tempted into like, I mean, do I need to start painting, cowboys? And because you feel like you can, you feel like I live in the West. I grew up reading Louis L'Amour cowboy books
Yeah.
and watching Westerns and, but I don't want to feel compelled. I don't want to feel like, well, I have to chase this market. But it seems to me that that's like the strongest representational market in America. And I'm wondering, because I love the positivity that you're saying with the interest globally for representational figurative painting. I have some of that positivity left. I'm getting less so as I get older, but I feel like
No, I think there's the other thing that gives me interest is even, let's say, the kind of academic or curatorial world is so much less hostile than they were. I mean, one of the things I always admire Daniel and Charles for, and others, you go back 50, 60 years, and if you were a figurative painter, you were a fascist.
yeah,
And nothing in their respective cases could be further from the truth. They're simply,
sure.
I mean, they're just not. And I think in the end, every generation slightly rebels against its parents, and so there's that Clement Greenberg moment where figurative art is, all these different sort of appalling things, and these 19th century paintings were compelled to the basement, and you could buy a Bouguereau for $5,000 or even less. Sometimes they couldn't even give it away fast enough.
Yeah.
And I think when you look at it today, there's a whole generation of academics and the market too.
Yeah.
And the two often work hand in hand, where they're saying, no, these are not just beautiful objects, but they're an insight into a moment. And I'm fairly confident that actually there's so much figurative painting in the world today that in the end, that will be, when people are studying our time, that will also be part of it.
Yeah.
To me,
They'll see it as a significant movement.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's not, I mean, the market is what it is. And I think it's a difficult and dangerous thing to chase because it changes with the fashion, and you're wearing blue and suddenly everyone's wearing red, and you have to throw out your blue clothes. Personally, no, it might come round again.
Right.
But I think one of the reasons for doing the MA course, the one Richard Greathouse who you mentioned, is it's every one of those teachers touches 300 students.
Absolutely, yeah.
I mean, the potential for that course to touch and transform lives is enormous. And,
yeah.
Again, this course and its impact would have been unthinkable 30 years ago.
Sure.
And now, even in really left-leaning districts and places where, again, if that modernist mentality was really truly so dominant, they wouldn't accept this course.
Yeah.
But they can see the impact it makes. They sense the sort of the tangible improvement in people's skills and therefore the self-worth that comes with that.
Yeah.
I'm not blind. I don't think I'm a naive person, but I also think, working in education all the time, it's not you have an obligation to be positive, but I actually genuinely believe that, not that we're at the start of some bright new dawn. I think a huge number of enormous challenges remain, but it's I'm not blind to the progress that's been made when you look at the same landscape 50, 60 years ago and the challenges that Daniel and Charles and their generation faced.
Yeah, I was lucky enough to talk to and record a conversation with Burton Silverman, who's for me a god. I just have so much respect for him as a person and a painter, and one of the reasons I admire him so much is because he was doing this in the face of such abject hatred and just people actively railing against this kind of art. And he and a small group of people, Harvey Dinnerstein and others, they just kept doing it. And I think that is, he just, to me, is one of the most courageous
it's incredible
painters.
integrity.
Yeah. And on top of the fact that I just love so much his work, just what it would take. I mean, he was doing illustration. It's not like he was doing these paintings that weren't finding an audience, and he did it in the face of no sales or whatever. He was making a living in other ways, but it's still the paintings that he was doing, these series that he was doing were I just can't, it's so impressive the courage it must have taken to just do it in the face of
outright hostility.
Right,
Often.
right.
And I think one of the things that gives me optimism is we have an art history lecture series at the school, and in the last year we've had people from the National Gallery in London, the Met, the Prado, the Rijksmuseum, the Louvre, all coming to speak at the school.
Yeah.
And that kind of engagement, and they come and they really like it. They see the students, they talk to them, they feel their enthusiasm, and they stay in touch and they ask to come back and speak again. People from Harvard, we have Harvard have a postgrad place in Florence, NYU, and they send their postgrads down to come and draw with us and other things. That's great. And so when those things, it's very slow and it's still a very incremental sort of embryonic thing. But that was inconceivable not that long ago.
Yeah. And so the MFA, that's something that you guys have gotten accreditation for?
Yeah. We just need to work out exactly how to structure the course, how to how to price it. So we're down to the last stages of the practical stuff. And how to put it, when you take over that job and you look at what Daniel and Susan created, you're hesitant to launch anything until you really know it's going to be good. Yeah. We've had some really, there are a number of, let's say, retired or semi-retired museum people that have come to live in Florence, so it's quite easy to find now people to help with the academic part of it. And it's just making sure that going back to one of your earlier points, I really want all of the faculty to be fully practicing artists.
Yeah, I think that's so important.
It's so important. And to be happy, and they're better teachers when success can be measured in so many different ways, but when you feel that I'm doing something with my life. If you're just teaching, you can be a fantastic teacher, and it's an incredibly noble profession. But as an artist in that environment, I think it helps when you feel that I can stand next to my work right now. Also, because you know how hard it is. I mean, if the teaching is too dominant, I think it's easy to become too doctrinal, too inflexible, and you forget how difficult it is to actually make a painting.
Well, you're also become incredibly dogmatic because you just keep regurgitating the same thing day after day after day. And when you're working on something in your own studio, the questions you're asking are completely different. Yeah. And so you have a far more expansive view. So if you're working on some complex multi-figure painting in your studio, and then you're critiquing an academic nude, you understand what they're doing and its post-graduation application. So I think it enhances your opportunity to critique in a way that is more globally useful for the student.
100% agree. Yeah. And so that's a big part of I feel and what Antonio really understands this as well, is trying to. It's not necessarily about launching exhibitions and things like that, but it's just about trying to find ways to help individual faculty members develop their lives and their careers, so that teaching is part of their life rather than as soon as it becomes too dominant a theme, I think there's an imbalance, and you invest way too much in that part of your life, that part of yourself. Yeah. It also, I think, becomes harder when you have a difficult student. Yeah. If all of myself is invested in my teaching, any slight pushback is almost a personal offense, and I think the teachers that are most successful at dealing with those moments are the ones who. Yeah, okay, you're very welcome to say that, but come on. Yeah. Well, let's look at this a different way all of a sudden.
Yeah, I also feel like it's kind of a sin to rob the world of what you could be creating in your studio because you're putting so much more time into teaching. Not that teaching doesn't reward the world as well. I mean, I find a huge amount of usefulness and gratitude for being able to pass on information. There's something about doing it that is so fulfilling in a way that painting doesn't give me.
Absolutely.
And so, like the last couple of years, I've just been painting, and there's a distinct void that I feel. I was invited by a recent graduate to come to a dinner on Monday night. I keep forgetting his name. I'm so sorry.
Don't worry.
I'm so sorry to him. I was so excited to talk to them because there's a bunch of there was a couple students that were still students and then recent graduates. I just completely hijacked their dinner. I felt so bad because I was just talking and talking. And they were asking questions, but I just there's something about being able to like share experience. I just really love the opportunity. It makes me feel like useful in a way that making a painting doesn't. And so I enjoy that so much. We've been talking about potentially creating a school. I don't know where this sits, but originally it was in Seattle, and the idea was to kind of recreate a Prix concept where it was a paid position where you focus really on composition, concept development, basically giving people who have recently graduated the academies an opportunity to
sorry, dog invasion,
an opportunity to study, figure out what the next step is. How do I now like learn how to be professional? How do I?
Sorry,
it's okay. How do I take these skills and apply them to art making? It's raining outside. And I think that was really intriguing to me. And it sounds like you guys are kind of starting to focus on that with the MFA program.
And I think it's a way of saying, and I think I realized this, through conversation with Daniel and just through my own experiences of life as well. There is no substitute, and to try and dilute the core 3-year program would be a huge mistake. I think it's an amazing program, and
you really shove a lot of education in those 3 years.
Yeah.
I mean, people go from almost zero sometimes to highly skilled in a very short period of time.
But it's in the same way that I think if you and one doesn't want to become too mechanical about it, but let's just say, for instance, you want to become a historian. And you say, okay, I do my BA degree in history, and at that point I've learned how to read documents and write a basic essay. It would be outrageous to call myself a historian at that point.
Sure.
Then you go and do an MA, then an MPhil, then a PhD, and even at that point you're still these are still kind of baby steps.
Yeah.
And more I think the certificate program we have is kind of like is kind of like a BA program. I think it's in some cases people get to a really very high level. But I think it's still, it's really answering those questions, and it's satisfying that need. It's kind of foundational plus. Some people have that urge anyway to be an artist, and they don't need that much help.
Yeah.
For other people, this might, as you were saying earlier, like some people, this is all very new to them.
Yeah.
And they need a little bit more assistance in to say, okay, this is how you build a project. This is how you might think about connecting to the world outside.
Yeah, that has been an interest of mine to not only pursue on a personal level to continue to get better at on my own, but also to create an environment and a community where there was a structure to help people find their way through that sort of problem solving, but also it was a community effort that sort of tried to create what I've seen as a common theme in 19th century biographies, where artists would get together regularly to offer critical feedback. And it would talk about how Alma Tadema would go down and talk to Sargent and Edwin Austin and Abbey as they were painting the Boston Public Library murals, and they would say, well, what if we did this in the background? Or what if you changed the costume to this? Or what if you changed the gesture? And Wagner would play music, and there's this like community and so many like great minds helping these individual artists solve problems, not in a way that changed their painting, but in a way that just asked questions and nudged them to like solve the problem a little bit more sophisticated. And I think that today's culture artistically is that sort of private genius that everybody's locks themselves in their studio and does their painting, and the first time anybody gets to see it is when it's on the wall in the show, which is too late. And I just feel like I could be a much better version of myself if I had a stronger community of people that were giving me feedback. So that kind of like MFA thing that you're talking about, I feel like that's the community I wanted to figure out how to help build and grow, but it would be a sort of community effort.
Yeah, I think that word is so important. One of the things that's really it's so gratifying for Daniel at the end of his time as director. I mean, he's still very involved in the school. He's running the etching program and teaching 1 day a week and so on. But it's how many of our graduates are now choosing to stay in Florence.
Yeah.
I think one of the things
I was shocked by that.
One of the things that's so, let's say, if, go back 200 years or even 100 years, and you had to live in the market. That's why Florence, the Renaissance happened in Florence, really because the money was here.
Yeah.
The artists came from the outside very often. It was, in the same year, everyone then went to Rome or everyone went to Paris. And I think the great thing about the flexibility that modern life gives you in terms of both sharing images but also shipping work around the world, you don't have to live in the. You can say, where is the best place for me to make it?
Yeah.
And there's an amazing community here, not just of painters, but also of models, of people who make frames, of materials, and in the end, I think it's an amazing place to make work.
I'm
and more people are choosing that, not just as figurative painters actually now, but people who are working in all sorts of creative disciplines are saying, I want to live somewhere which is on a human scale where I can find that community.
Yeah.
Where I can exchange ideas and feelings, and let's just see what the hell the hell happens.
My wife and I have been talking about moving and kind of like starting over somewhere for quite a while now, and there's so many like ups and downs to that conversation over the years. So many times we almost pulled the trigger and went here, and for one reason or another we haven't quite gotten there. But every time I travel, I think, could I live here? I want to be open to what is the community like, what access to museums, how inspired am I? And I have always said I've never been so fully inspired, constantly inspired, as when I was a student at Florence Academy, just because even the bike ride is beautiful to and from school. Even the mundane walk to the grocery store for the second time that day is there's always something to look at. And in America, especially in the West, everything's new, everything is disposable, everything is it's much more I have to search harder to find that same kind of inspiration. But one thing I was surprised about when I got here was how many more people are here than I realized, how many more studios are running, how many more artists are living and working here, doing really beautiful things, how many schools there are, how many students there are. There's and I just came from Paris, and I love Paris. Paris is my favorite city in the world. And there is not a tenth of the artists or
the concentration
community or going on there as there seems to be here. And I'm totally shocked by that. I don't know why, but
it's cost. It's just cheaper.
And the cost of living. I just talking to my wife the last couple of days. I'm like, it would be the smartest fiscal decision to move back to Florence. I mean, we both love Florence, and it was just never on my radar. In fact, when I first flew in and walked the streets the first couple of days, I was like, nah, I love the city, but this is my ancient past. I'm never going to do this again. And then by the end of the first week, I was just like, is this happening? Am I really becoming a Florentine citizen again? Am I really thinking that this might be my future? And every day I talk to my wife, it gets more and more do we have to come back here? I think we might have to come back here. There's just the opportunities, the community, the inspiration, the museums, the number of studios, the excitement, the energy of the place. It feels like it's what I would imagine kind of Paris might have been in the 19th century. Just it became kind of the epicenter. And Florence, I never from the outside looking in would have considered that it had a little epicenter to it, other than the schools that I knew about.
No, it's more than that now. That's the
and now it has a completely different feel than when I was a student. And I don't know if that vibe has actually gotten out, if people know how much is going on here, but I am completely blown away by how much is going on here.
I think it's a really, for all that it is an old-fashioned city and, a small city. I mean, the thing I find interesting here is, let's say you wake up in the shoes of Hillary Clinton one morning, and you're going on a kind of which cities in the world are you guaranteed to have been to? And obviously you can think of New York and Washington, Paris, Hong Kong, and London. Florence is the smallest city you're very likely to have been to.
Mm-hmm.
And so everyone comes here.
Yeah.
That's not everyone, but when you reach a certain
well,
level.
my
of, let's
girls
say,
are going to talk to you later about how Harry Styles came and that you met him because they're like the biggest Harry Styles fans. But that's another conversation.
He's come to live in Italy as well. He lives down in southern Tuscany and sort of whizzes around a bit. But
yeah,
so many people had come to Florence, and how many other cities of 500,000 people?
Yeah.
Are people like that guaranteed to come to? Mm-hmm. So there is this opportunity here to meet people that you would never in a million years come into contact with if you were in a bigger metropolis.
Sure.
Because it's just so big.
Yeah.
And Florence, and particularly if you're here and you're working in that environment where you're interested in art and beauty and slow time and making things with your hands,
mm-hmm.
that's why a lot of these people come here.
Yeah.
And so it offers sort of in a sort of synchronistic way, it offers these opportunities that lots of other places don't. And and it's so heartening to see, not just Florence Academy graduates, but there are, all sorts of other, wonderful artists who, we all know who've just said, yeah, I'm still going to sell through my gallery in New York or mm-hmm. London or Paris or wherever it is, or I'm going to sell online, which is an increasingly
right.
But I'm going to do it here, and
mm-hmm.
It's made the city a richer and more dynamic place than perhaps it was a little while ago.
Yeah, I'm so shocked by it. I can't even get over how unexpected the city is to me coming back now. I even came back in 2018. It didn't quite have that same feel, but mm-hmm. I wasn't here quite as long. And I told my wife, like, we're spending almost a month here. I'm with my two daughters, and I was saying, I think if I was only here 2 weeks, I don't think I would have seen this.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think it would have occurred to me that there's as much going on as there is.
You have to scratch a bit.
Yeah, and I've had enough time to walk around. I've had enough time to paint. I've had enough time to, make appointments and go meet people and do, record a few of these conversations, but mostly just visit studios and meet people I haven't met before. Maybe had some, online correspondence with, but. I don't think if I was here for a shorter period of time, I would have really understood that. And
I think your time, that's very wise of you in the sense that I think it's a city that rewards slowing down. It's also a city that's still really all about personal contact. And so,
mm-hmm.
I mean, not in some like sort of clannish, weird, like who kind of way, but it's just in the end, it's a personal network of people you trust, people you make friends with, people you meet at the bar or whatever, and it still works in that way. I mean, it's a digital city. There are lots of digital nomads who've come to live here mm-hmm. too, but it's still about you turn up in the morning, you order your coffee, you smile, the person next to you asks you about this, and something happens from that.
Yeah,
and that's a way of living that resonates with me very powerfully, and then that's it's linked to the art, linked to the community, linked to. I'm very happy. I'm very happy here, and I'm still here for the same reasons I was when I came as a 14-year-old boy.
Yeah.
But in a way, I hope that light never goes out.
Yeah. Well, for me, it never did. And I was only here 2 years, and of course, you're going home, so mm-hmm. you take advantage of the time you're here. But it never got old. There was the mundane aspects of daily existence seep into your life no matter where you live. But even with those elements coming in to play, I was just never bored. My mind was turned on in a way that it just hasn't been since I left. Mm-hmm. Meaning like. It was always running at a 7 or 8, mm-hmm. And then when you really concentrate, you get up.
Okay.
But in Utah, I just feel like there's only moments where it really ratchets up like that, where you like fall, walking through the the mountains in the fall is just like, oh my God, it's so gorgeous here. But those are smaller moments, and it's almost like the memory of how inspiring and how amazing it is starts to slowly fade the longer I'm away from it, and then I come back and it's like breathing again. It's like, oh, this is what it could be. This is what life could be. And so, yeah.
I think it's worth noting that America, I mean, almost every cultural organization in Florence is to some extent, if not reliant, at least partly reliant on American money, and the sacrifices that our graduates make when they move back, if you want to call them sacrifices, that still powers the art world. It still powers everything, and it's it's not to be dismissed. We have a board of trustees who are unbelievably generous and supportive, and the majority are from the United States, and so that system of organizing life is, however uncomfortable it might make some people feel, or however much at times we might feel. I grew up in the UK, which is similarly kind of, let's say, Anglo-Saxon and Western in that way. I'm very grateful to live here, but it's impossible to. I don't pretend I'm not a beneficiary of all of that as well.
Yeah. I think it's
a delicate balance to try and strike.
Sure. I think another thing that is always like really intriguing about the city is how diverse it is. Like you were saying about the school, the 38 countries and the number of students you have, and it's a city that is heavily reliant on tourism for money, but that just means that there's an ever revolving like number of people from diverse areas that you're likely to meet and come in contact with, and it is such a tiny space. Yeah. It's you can walk across it in 30 minutes. I feel like maybe a little bit more, but I think it is unique, like you said. I think it's unique in the world for its opportunity to have a community that feels incredibly, what's the word? Sort of private, like small. It feels like a small, tight-knit community, but it's still incredibly expansive.
Yeah.
I just haven't visited. I've traveled quite a bit, especially this year, and I just haven't felt the same thing that exists elsewhere. So again, I'm just shocked. I'm shocked. Like I had written Florence off as something I loved in my past, but it was never an option. And a lot of that came with like the difficulties of being a student here and having little kids and not having a car, like all those little things that kind of added up to like life irritations. But it's just not the same place it was when I was here as a student.
I mean, I think and going back to a question you asked earlier about organizing time and the pressures of, let's say, running the school. I think the thing that helps in the end is that you're dealing with a community that's united through, from all these different places, but united through a passion for one particular thing. And so whenever stuff goes wrong, really it's a crime of passion. And you're not really dealing at any moment in your life with apathy, which is pretty amazing.
Yeah.
And so you have all these, young or youngish or sort of a bit young people or young at heart people.
Yeah.
But they all just love the same thing. And so, of course, occasionally that boils over and someone's love for this bumps into someone else's love for this, and occasionally it gets in a slightly messy and unpleasant way. But in the end, everyone understands that they're all there really in the end for the same reason, and that's the it's the one risk of going down the MFA route is that what we don't have right now. I mean, okay, we give people a certificate, and it's a nice thing to say I've earned this.
Yeah.
But we don't have kind of degree chasers, and so the danger of that model is you have people who are just coming to you for a qualification.
Sure.
And it's not necessarily quite the same attachment to saying, I'm giving up 3 years of my life to earn this piece of paper, which, it tells you something, but it's not quite an MFA. Would
there be a requirement to enter the MFA to have academic experience so that there was at least some sort of common language?
It's a really good question. That's one of the last sort of, I think anyone that could show that they've done, the idea is that everyone would have 2 principal teachers. One would be, we'd have a short list of people that you could choose from. You say, I would like this person to help mentor my time through this project, and we could sort of agree or recommend another one.
Yeah.
And then we would assign a second teacher based on the submission, which would say, based on your idea, this is the level of your work, and this person is responsible specifically for helping to raise the technical or that part of so you can really execute your idea.
Yeah.
And so we could actually help, depending on the nature of the skill or the gap between aim and current level.
Yeah.
We could take quite a wide range of people, and it's also it's an important way to, it's an attractive program. It's a sort of glossy, shiny new thing. And so there's let's say the internal politics of school, and you want to make sure you sort of spread and share the love.
Yeah.
So that it's.
I can imagine that. Because it is a specific language, and even if you go from, Florence Academy to the GCA, for instance, there are significant variations in how things are spoken of that can make it very confusing. If you come from a university system without really any academic experience, and then for one, how do you help people make pictures when they don't have the language? That would be, I could see a huge issue to deal with, but also it would take a certain amount of time just to come together on the vocabulary. How do I help you understand exactly what I mean when I give a critique? Because we may be using similar words for different purposes. And is there, with an MFA, is there a requirement that they have a bachelor's first?
Not always, but there's. It's surprisingly more flexible than we realized when we started looking into it. I think people that have never gone through any type of academic training, it would be an exception rather than the rule that people like that would be admitted.
Yeah.
But if someone had shown the work, you might be, for example, the son or daughter of an academic painter, and you've lived enough in that world, and your parents have maybe you could have been homeschooled by your parents, and so it was part of your life in that way.
Yeah.
And we want to be flexible enough to take the people who can really make the work they want to make. But you have to have really pretty rigorous standards to get through the accreditation process. And
so it would be open to somebody who went through the 3-year program, even though they don't have a degree.
Yeah, 100%. And that's not an issue.
Yeah, that's great.
And I think the majority of the people will probably be in-house.
Yeah.
But it would be really tragic if it was limited to just that. We want to bring in, not just with students, but also the whole point is, with the faculty, you can bring people in for a month in a kind of a high impact way, just to come and talk and share. And it won't be the same structured daily critique rhythm. It's much more irregular than that. There's a lot of time for personal investigation, for what type of materials are you going to use for this project?
Yeah.
And
we had talked about with the program we were kind of creating, which has a lot of similarities to what you're talking about, that we would have a couple of studios set aside for professionals where we'd reach out to, like really highly respected professionals like a Vincent Desiderio, Steve Massale, or a Sean Lay, or like whoever, and say, present us with like 4 or 5 ideas that you really want to paint. We're going to choose the one we like. We'll commission you to do the painting, but as part of the commission, you have to make it in our studios.
Yeah.
So we can kind of see how your working method, and as part of the commission, you also have to give feedback once a week to our students. And I thought that was kind of a nice way to have an ever revolving group of expertise. Also, you get to build kind of a body of work because you're purchasing work. But you have the foundation of teachers that are guiding them day to day, so that there can be that sort of common language and foundation. And then you have those visiting instructors, which is really, really kind of an interesting idea to me. But yeah, it's exciting you guys are doing that. I hadn't heard about that. I did hear about the MA program, and I know Mandy Teese, who
she started it, and now she stepped aside, and so Richard Greathouse has taken over the directorship of that program. Yeah,
that's great. And this MFA sounds really exciting.
It was really that the MA was Mandy and Susan Tintori's. Sort of Mandy had an initial idea, and then Susan helped to bring it under the FAA umbrella a little bit.
Yeah.
And for a while it was sort of like a hybrid part in, part out thing, and now it's fully ours.
Yeah.
No, it's such a beautiful idea.
Yeah. It's exciting. I don't know where my future is going to lead me, but I don't know. As I'm sitting here now, I feel like Florence might be an inevitability.
You know where we are.
I do. I will. I'm sure I'll be bothering you at some point again. Yeah. I think it's such a great resource. Just walking through the halls. There's a little bit of PTSD when I see a half done cast, but there's also just something about being around young, excited students that's invigorating, and you get to kind of share that passion that they have, that just naive optimism that is so beautiful when you're younger. And yeah, I think it's been really fun to be back here and experience that and discover what I wasn't expecting, which was how intense the scene is here. Yeah. Really pretty amazing. So yeah. And so for you, it's just full speed ahead with the school and continuing with your portrait commissions. Where can people find your work? I'll try to get some like JPEGs from you that we can put on.
I'll send you a few. I have an Instagram account and I put things up there. I also post a lot of work not by myself on there. But no, I mean, commissions, it's a bit difficult. There's often sort of, how to put it, non-disclosure agreements and all sorts of other things. Yeah. But I post as much as I can. Yeah. On there. And
so is it Tom Richards?
Yeah,
is
Tom
your
Richards.
Instagram handle?
Tom in Florence, actually. But
That's right.
Tom Richards comes up too, I think.
Okay, so Tom in Florence is your Instagram, and then do you have a website?
I do, but actually it's just one photo of an old photo of my old studio when I had it inside the school, and you just click on that and you go back to Instagram again.
Okay.
And in the end, I'd seen a lot of artist websites, and I never felt the work was obviously distinctive, but I never felt they really distinguished themselves from each other. And rather than pay for the continual upkeep, I just thought link it back to that, and in the end,
they can see all the updated work. And
I remember meeting a restorer. He was like this guy in London, and I mean, he was doing all of the really high value work for Christie's and Sotheby's. He was restoring $70 million Rubens paintings and stuff. And I remember thinking, God, that's so cool. It's very brave, maybe mad, but very cool. And his website, you clicked on the Google link, and it was just a deep red page, and you had to scroll down a lot. And eventually at the very bottom was a tiny email address. But if you let go of the mouse, you bounce back up to the top again.
Oh my gosh.
And that was the only way to contact him. And I've always thought that was actually pretty badass.
Yeah.
I'm not quite brave enough to do that, but I deeply admire it as a marketing philosophy.
Yeah, it's interesting. I feel like I have to make myself so accessible just in case anyone wants to get a hold of me. But yeah, I think it's been really fun to get to know you a little bit and see your space and kind of get into your world. I hope I can
come see the studio next time you're in Florence.
Yeah, for sure. It's Dan's old studio, is it?
It's close by.
It's close by.
Actually,
Dan
at Donatello. So Charles took over.
That's right.
At one point, actually, when I was working for Charles, he took over what used to be Mark D'Alessio and Daniel's spaces, which were next door but not connected. Now they're connected, and I have the one next to that.
Okay.
And I mean, they're purpose-built, 100-meter square, 6-meter high ceiling, 19th century. You mentioned Leo's studio earlier in our conversation. In Boston, it's a little bit like these kind of Fenway studios in Boston, or there's the Talgarth Road studios in London, or there are some in Paris. But it's my refuge from the world, and it's up. I think for all people who are like setting up a studio, it's like you have to make it somewhere where you're just desperate to go and you hate leaving.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then you know it's all right.
Yeah, I had that when I had my school. I created this little space that I loved, wood burning stove and library, and I loved being there so much. And when I shut that down, now I've got a spare bedroom that I'm working out of that it just makes me feel like an old retiree. Shuffling around in my slippers and coffee mug, and
that's not the vibe in person, I can assure you.
Thank you. I just it makes me feel so unprofessional in a weird way, and it's not an environment where I get out a lot either. So I'm not really interacting with people. So it's in a lot of ways.
You clearly have the professional drive to make that work, whereas I've always struggled when I've lived in a connection to my studio space. I either find I work far too much and then I never get the distance, or I work too little because it's just so easy to get swamped by domestic stuff. And
Yeah.
so I'm in awe of people that can like connect those two parts to their life, because I think it requires a lot of
Yeah.
requires a huge amount of discipline.
It is a forced discipline for sure, because that domestic quality you're talking about can be very disruptive, and it seeps in. It just kind of like creeps in. So having that professional space when I had it, it felt more professional, but it was also so easy. Like I was only there for one reason, right? So when I was there, it was like I'm here to work. Otherwise, I'd be home.
I think Vermeer had like 11 kids.
You did?
Vermeer.
Oh, geez.
And it's amazing when you look at those paintings, there's this incredible stillness, but you think
Yeah.
that like just around the corner, there's 11 children.
Wow.
And whenever I looked there was a big show of his in Amsterdam last year, and I went there with this thing of like, okay, where are the children?
Yeah.
And occasionally there's a glimpse of domestic life with people arranging kind of fabric or something
Yeah,
like that.
yeah.
But he was able to create this kind of quietness and stillness, and maybe his painting was literally that. It was this kind of
That was his
maniacal
therapy.
desire to just
Yeah.
have these moments of order in amongst what must have been actually a pretty chaotic
Yeah.
existence.
Yeah. Interesting from a psychological standpoint to think about it that way. That might have been his way of finding solace.
Yeah.
Yeah. Interesting. Well, thank you for letting me in and talking to me. It's so exciting, to see where you're going to take it. I'm excited to watch what happens with the MFA program, and the campus is gorgeous. You're a lucky guy.
Yeah.
You've got a pretty sweet setup here. The city itself, everything you've got going on is pretty exciting. So, yeah. Thanks.
Thank you, Daniel, as well.
Yeah.
For both of us.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks. And that's it. Cool.
Thanks.